broken windows and empty hallways, a pale dead moon in the sky streaked with gray, human kindness overflowing, and I think it's going to rain today. Scarecrows dressed in the latest styles, with frozen smiles to keep love away. Human kindness, it's overflowing, and I think it's going to rain today. Lonely, lonely.
There is an ancient Scottish children's rhyme that goes something like this. Monday's child is fair of face, Tuesday's child is full of grace, Wednesday's child is full of woe, Thursday's child has far to go, Friday's child is loving and giving, Saturday's child works hard for a living. But the child that is born on the Sabbath day is bonny and blithe and good and gay. But for millions upon millions of children in America and in Europe and throughout the rest of the world, victims of acts of physical abduction by a parent, mostly women, and taken also against their will by state-authorized abduction, initiated again virtually entirely by women, with support given them under color of law, separated from their significant and loving other parents, isolated and vulnerable to mental illness, educational dysfunction, unwanted pregnancies, alcohol and drug addiction, and sociopathic behavior, sending them into our prisons. They are and will be in future generations Wednesday's children. Central Park, an oasis in the New York asphalt desert, a place where lovers hold hands, where moms and dads and grandparents come with our children to simply enjoy the fresh air, to paddle in the lake, to see the animals, to play ball, fly kites, and simply to walk out amongst the flowers of its beautiful fields. It is not a place we normally identify with feelings of intense sorrow and pain and loneliness, and a deep sense of outrage. So it is something of an irony that we visit today with three fathers of very diverse backgrounds, all of whom have expressed those feelings. One parent who's been the victim of parental abduction and has experienced what he believes to be injustice and gender discrimination against men is David Burton. He's an Englishman, and his wife is a dual citizen of England and Nigeria. David has two children, Annabelle and Andrew, now aged 10 and 5. According to David, the children were taken from England on holiday to America and not returned by his estranged wife. His story is chilling.
Well, my son, Jordan Carson, was abducted from New York City in July of 1993. He was abducted by his mother, who was at that time the custodial parent.
Were you married at the time?
I was not married. My son was born out of wedlock, and we had a big dispute after he was born. It started right after he was born, and I entered into the bizarre and, to me, uncharted territory of family court in Manhattan.
But how did you find out that physically they were missing? I mean,
one day I came home and they were gone. She didn't show up at the
all right. So you discover that your wife and children are missing. Was everything in place in the house? Had they taken anything? Were there any signs?
It was on a cold January day, January 16th, 1993.
Right.
I came home at 5, 6 in the evening. No medicines were gone, no clothes were gone.
No note?
No note.
What is the likely effect on children of the kind of separation and loss which is based on abduction by one of their parents and the subsequent denial of their right to a relationship to the victim parent?
Okay, I think that for most children we can assume that the loss of a parent is one of the most profound destructive experiences that can happen to a child in its life. I'm not saying that a child can't recover from it. In fact, I think most children do recover from it if they have good nurturing parents who are left, or good nurturing caretakers who are left. But it leaves a terrible scar, and without going into all the details, depending on at what age it happens, the experience of it is experienced psychologically very differently and has many different ramifications.
Right, but
Now,
you said there was a difference between...
Now, hold on. If we start with the presumption
right.
that the absolute loss of a parent by death
right.
is a critically traumatic experience in the life of a child, now let's look at what it would mean to a child to lose a parent by guile, and while the parent is alive, either because a parent abandons the child, in fact, and there are parents, I believe, who do abandon their children. The child not only has to deal with the fact that the parent is not available, has to deal with the fact that the parent doesn't want to be available, doesn't care enough about the connection in the child's mind
right.
to do something about the loss. And if you go from that, you can go to what I believe is the most serious way of losing a parent, which is that the other parent tries to destroy the relationship between the child and the other parent.
Is that what, in fact, you think might be taking place inside the psychological framework of abduction?
Well, I don't think there's any question about it. I mean, I think there's just a fact of life that in certain divorces, in certain separations, there is frequently so much animosity and rage and anger on the part of one parent that on occasion that parent will abduct the child and do it to destroy the relationship between that parent and the other parent and the child.
Having introduced our victim parents, we begin our report here at the United Nations, where over 45 countries have signed an international treaty, the Hague Convention on the Civil Aspects of International Child Abduction. This treaty seeks to protect children from acts of kidnapping by a parent and offers a remedy for that child and victim parent. However, as we will show, it doesn't always operate fairly in a gender-neutral manner, and often fails to avoid the pitfalls of petty nationalism, extreme feminist politics, and anti-male discrimination. Because this treaty is both international law and treaty law of the United States, we took up the matter with the State Department's Office of Children's Issues. First of all, Ray Claw, thanks for taking time out from your really busy schedule and flying in from Washington for this program. And I guess because you're the director of the Office of Children's Issues, the first obvious question is, what on earth is the Office of Children's Issues in the State Department?
The Office of Children's Issues deals primarily with international parental child abduction cases, and we also deal with international adoption policy issues. The office was created in 1994 because the State Department realized that there was a lot more of these international child custody type issues coming up, and the Child Custody Division in the Office of Overseas Citizen Services just wasn't able to cope with the workload and give these cases the kind of individual attention they needed.
Right, so primarily the office is actually playing a role in international parental abduction cases, but what is the role? I mean, how specifically does this play out?
We help people understand that there is a private legal remedy to international parental child abductions called the Hague Abduction Convention, shorthand term. We help people fill in the application, we give them basic information, we forward completed applications to the foreign central authorities. We try to monitor the judicial proceedings in the foreign country and just serve as a link between the left behind parent and the foreign judicial authorities.
Nancy, it's very good of you to come all the way in from Washington for today's program.
It's good to be here.
Yeah. Let's get started with a simple and direct question. What exactly is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and what role does it play in child abduction cases?
We are a private nonprofit organization that was established in 1984 and is mandated by Congress to handle all cases of missing children. More recently, in '95, we signed an agreement with the State Department to handle cases under the Hague Convention when kids are brought into the United States.
Oh, right. Yeah, I see that from your letterheads also, interestingly enough. I see from the letterheads that you carry the seal of the Justice Department.
We work very closely with the Justice Department. We receive a lot of funding from them to carry out our congressional mandate.
So you're really like a quasar. You're half governmental and half non-profit private.
Well, we are private nonprofit.
Right.
We're in no part governmental, but we do work closely with the government.
All right, well that explains that. Now, Nancy, according to all of our research for this program and even some of your own figures, we seem to be confronted with a rather gargantuan problem, almost an epidemic of epic proportion, as it were, of parental abductions. Is that in fact the case?
You know, we don't have as good of numbers as we should on the scope of the problem. In 1990, Department of Justice did a study, and their best figures suggest that there are about 350,000 children who are parentally abducted a year.
That's an extraordinary figure.
That includes kids who are taken for a couple hours, days,
Right.
and all the way up to kids who are taken across state lines and concealed.
But those figures, how are they reported? These are just reported cases. I mean, would there be a percentage of cases that go largely unreported for a variety of reasons?
I think that there probably are. I mean, there are a large number of people who don't know how to access the system, and these numbers are going to be taken from a sample of people who have, at some point, accessed the system.
And these figures are now 6 or 7 years out of date, aren't they now?
Right. It's my understanding that they are in the process of redoing those numbers.
Would your suspicion be that these figures have remained the same or have accelerated?
I wouldn't be surprised if they were higher or remain the same.
Barbara Sobel, you've been in practice for 10 years, and your practice consists primarily of matrimonial law, including international matrimonial law and cases of international child abduction. Is that so?
Yes.
Right. Barbara, a simple, vile question to begin with. What went wrong in the David Burton case?
Well, in my opinion, the authorities that were involved, those authorities being the judicial authorities, the court, and the agencies of the court, and the school authorities were in direct violation of the Hague Convention.
And what makes you say that? In what way had they violated the convention?
Well, they contravened the letter and the spirit of the Hague Convention insofar as the purpose of the Hague is the speedy and the expeditious return of the child and safe return of the child.
Right.
And also to disclose the whereabouts, to make an effort to find out the whereabouts of the child.
Well, that seems logical. How can you return a child you don't find? Yes, exactly.
Well, to disclose the whereabouts of the child.
Did
to find out where the child is and to disclose it.
Now, David Burton has told us that he met with, or you met with, great obstacles in actually being able to locate these children. Is that, in fact, what took place?
Yes.
Okay, Ray, let me turn to some rather disturbing allegations made not just by victim parents, but by lawyers and government officials. Indeed, allegations have it that children are being hidden not merely by illicit underground networks, which I know that we've discussed, and you don't have much to offer on that score, but within the system itself, by welfare offices and educational authorities. What is going on here?
I have no information about this kind of activity. As far as I know, there haven't been any cases of U.S. authorities trying to hide children from, Hague proceedings.
Do you feel the law guardian obstructed your ability to A, locate, B, contact your children, safeguard them, pending these hearings?
Absolutely. What happened was we were in the court. Mother had been moved from one shelter to another with the children, and the law guardian directly said in court that yes, they knew and they had assisted in the movement of mother and children, and under no circumstances were they going to release the address to myself or my attorney or to the court.
What I think the allegations are is not that they're hiding children from Hague proceedings, but that they're not being cooperative with the treaty and with the judicial authorities attempting to hear Hague petitions. And let me be more specific. According to Diane Viggers of the New York State Criminal Justice Department, the clearinghouse for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they have encountered all sorts of opposition from such authorities in the location of children hidden in the system in welfare shelters. And this is stopping them from carrying out their work. And I've heard the same thing from the National Center for Missing Children itself. So do we have a problem? Let's make it turn it into a hypothetical. Do we have a problem if what they're reporting is true? If the New York State or the New York City Department of the Homeless refuses to reveal the whereabouts of children when an application has come in from a parent abroad seeking to locate them because there's a Hague petition pending, do we have a conflict between perhaps state regulations permitting of confidentiality on the one hand and the Hague Treaty on the other, which demands that these authorities cooperate to locate children? I know there's a long question, but it has to be specific.
I see. I'm not a lawyer. I would assume that a judge who is looking for a child, trying to hear a case, would be able to order the cooperation of whatever appropriate authorities would be necessary.
Well, this is the problem that I think we need some guidance from the central authority on, because it's come to my attention from a variety of sources, including the lawyers who are trying these cases, that judges are not taking up their powers and their jurisdiction in order to subpoena and enforce the location of children. So we have a problem that people are claiming the treaty doesn't work. It isn't working.
Well, I definitely think judges should use all authority within their power to make sure that these cases are heard properly, that children are found, and the issues are decided promptly.
As I understand it, your former attorney filed an order to show cause, got an arrest warrant, and also sought damages against lawyers for children, the law guardians. Is that so?
That is correct.
Right. And what happened when your attorney, and I believe yourself, went to serve the arrest warrant?
We went down with two people from the precinct, two police officers. We talked to the senior people in the school. We were asked to wait, and then some delaying tactics for not bringing the children out of the classroom.
What reason was given for not bringing the children?
Just that they were in class, they didn't want to rush them out of class, and they would be, they said they felt the children might be afraid.
What did the police officers say about this?
The police officers basically backed up the attorney that they were here to assist with the warrant.
So why wasn't the warrant executed?
Eventually, the senior people at school, and my daughter had become a little frightened, and they took that as a sign that they could contact their own legal advisors to object effectively to the warrant that had already been taken out.
So the arrest warrant was never really then acted on?
That's correct. The delay took place such that mother returned to school to pick the children up, and the school rang the precinct, and they had another two officers come down, so we had a situation of 4 police officers, 2 in one camp and 2 in the other.
Given that the New York State Clearinghouse has told us that law guardians, the Department of the Homeless here in New York, and the Board of Educational Authorities have definitely, in various cases, shielded behind confidentiality regulations in order to rationalize their decisions to hide children, and I have evidence from one British father that this has clearly been done in a recent case, why has nothing been done to this day to remedy this situation, if they know about it?
I think this is something that needs to be addressed with state law. I mean, state laws vary on, we find we have a lot of success in locating children through schools. Some state laws require the other parent to be notified if anyone checks to see if the child is enrolled. that's a barrier that we face.
But if we have a felon fleeing from a crime, I mean, there are two ways to look at The Hague. We can say that The Hague is the civil, as it's called, the civil aspects of international child abduction. One could make criminal charges against the abducting parent too, could they not?
Right.
In which case, they would merely be felons fleeing, and we find ourselves in the awkward position, the contradictory position of having state agencies hiding felons who are fleeing from a crime.
If there is an arrest warrant...
Is this thinking woolly, or am I making sense?
Well, it's beyond my experience. I mean, I would be shocked to learn that typically police can do much, much more if there is an arrest warrant. But when we're dealing with the civil part of it, it is more difficult to get the information. When you have an arrest warrant for the parent, it becomes a criminal investigation, and we have a lot more leeway in investigating.
No, I mean, I take that.
But they're rarely done in conjunction. I mean, our applications are through the Hague Convention. There are rarely, in addition to that, arrest warrants for the parent issued by the foreign country.
Well, let me take up one fact pattern case, that we've researched. A British Nigerian mother, here's the hypothetical, a British Nigerian mother was allowed to come into this country as a holidaymaker. She came with 2 children from England. She definitely overstayed her visitor's visa. She had return air tickets. She got taken into a New York City shelter. She had the children placed into a local school. She refused to return the children back into the custodial care of the father in England. So this is an abduction retention, as it were. It's really a retention. And she was even in the process of getting a green card. Now, in this particular case, in which I have seen all of the evidence, the father has raised serious allegations against the New York City Department of the Homeless, who refused to reveal the whereabouts of his children even after being subpoenaed. The British Embassy refused him knowledge of his children's address, and he's also accused both the court and the British Embassy of dealing ex parte. And this brings up a point you raised earlier. There was a communication between the federal judge and the British consulate regarding a private arrangement to make a quote-unquote voluntary return of these children to England. The father knew nothing of this, though the case was pending and was waiting nothing but a decision from the federal judge. Is this not wrong?
In that case, one of the tools which maybe could have been used, and which has been used in other cases, is a civil, what's called a pickup order.
He had an arrest warrant.
Oh, he did have an arrest warrant.
He actually, at one point, the father, and I've seen a copy of it, his attorney, who we'll be speaking to in this program, had an arrest warrant which was not acted on, and great opposition was met when she attempted, with 2 policemen, to have the children picked up from the local school. The school authorities did not cooperate. And the chaos was so, that you can imagine the scene at the school with the police and the lawyer and the distraught father and the children in the school. And in the end, the judge recalled the warrant.
Yeah. I think that really illustrates one of the big problems, which is, in many cases, family abduction is not taken seriously.
So we went into Supreme Court with an order to show cause, a Hague petition, with a warrant to have the children returned. Right. The judge in that case signed it, and I went down to the police station and had it enforced, and we went to the school where the children were. The school authorities interfered. They made phone calls. They totally disregarded the fact that I had a warrant signed by a Supreme Court judge. And they interfered with the police. The police allowed them to interfere. They called the court, and they called Lawyers for Children. And Lawyers for Children somehow managed to convince the judge that there was abuse in this case. There was absolutely no documentation of abuse.
That there is, from men's groups and men all over the world, an ongoing set of allegations and claims that there is rampant gender bias in the system. It still exists. and they're being treated like second-class citizens, and they're having their relationships to their children severed. So the question I ask you is, A, yes, do you think this is true or not? But more importantly, if it's true, what is the psychological set of dynamics at play which allows this set of conditions to exist?
Right. Let me say that, first of all, you may have to break up this question.
I probably have to.
Yes. Remember the second part of the question. I'm going to only, for the moment, respond to the first. The answer to the first part of the question is that there is no doubt whatsoever that in contested custody cases, that the bias towards women, towards mothers, is extraordinary. Okay, and I've also talked in things I've written about how outraged men are by this, because it is one of the first times in their life they have experienced gender bias.
Yes.
They're not used to gender bias. And women are far more used to gender bias in our society. They deal with it probably on a day-to-day basis. But men are not used to gender bias. And when it really gets to the heart of their life, which is their relationship to their children.
Your personal liberty and the liberty of your children.
Frankly, men go bonkers. They can't tolerate it. And they understand, I think for the first time, how bad discrimination based on gender can actually be.
I don't want to berate this, but I have with me a fax letter from the U.S. Embassy in England to the State Department in Washington, which says that in Britain, parents have no rights, fathers have even fewer than none, end quote. Would you expect as a father that you would get a fair trial in Britain if you had a child taken there?
That was a fax from the U.S. Embassy?
Yes, from the United States Embassy in London, written directly to the State Department in Washington in the year 1990, and of course for privacy reasons I can't give you the case, but I have the fax letter right in front of me, and I read directly from it as a quote. Now, this is the kind of thing that comes to mind, and it troubles people greatly, and I think they have cause for concern when that is the view of an official state body writing to another state body, that here's a country in which fathers have no rights.
The good thing about it is that person's not making the decision. It's the judge that's making the decision, and I would hope that judges would apply the laws the way they are written.
Embassies report to the State Department, fathers in Britain have no rights.
I have read that disclosure, and yes, it's a shock.
A serious complaint, an ongoing complaint, and I've heard it round the world from men and men's groups. And they're claiming that they are the victims of endemic, systematic, cynical, unjust treatment before courts of several Hague signatory nations. And in short, my question is there rampant gender discrimination at play at all in these cases, similar to that men feel and complain of in state custodial process?
It's hard to prove gender discrimination. To give a little bit of background, that when the treaty was negotiated in 1980, it was felt that men would be the primary abductors. At the most recent Hague Review Conference, one of the longtime employees of the Permanent Bureau said that anecdotal evidence suggests that the majority of abductors are now women, primary caregivers.
Yes.
And I think it's clear that in some countries there seems to be the courts lean toward the mothers.
It's interesting, you know, that you say at the recent conference there was anecdotal evidence that the majority of abductors are now women, because I had the odd experience when in dealing with this program and doing my research. I downloaded a random sample of 50 cases from the National Center on family abduction, and the numbers were astounding. 45 cases were abductions by mothers, 4 were by men, 3 of whom were Arab, so I consider that to be a very special, atypical sample, and 1 by a grandparent of indeterminate origin. I didn't know whether it was from the maternal side or the paternal side, but I was astounded by those figures. Why do you think that women are abducting?
When this actually became a Hague hearing,
I assume there was some kind of due process in this case.
In the beginning.
In the beginning, in the beginning there was due process. What happened afterwards, we know not. The hearing was made. You put in a memorandum of law, did you not?
Yes.
And I've seen that memorandum of law. It seemed to me at the time, and does now today, seems to have been sufficient to have you've made the correct arguments in order to obtain a return of these children for the matter to be dealt with by the English courts. Why, in your view, did the judge destroy the petition, just knock it down?
Because he was biased.
Really? It's a powerful...
The bias was evident from the beginning. There is a lot of gender bias in hate cases.
Why is that?
And the bias is against the father most of the time.
I'm surprised to hear you say that, actually. I didn't expect that you would. But and it so happens my research seems to support that view, but why on earth should that be the case? I mean, haven't we gone beyond all of this gender discrimination nonsense? Weren't we all liberated in 1968 by Gloria Steinem?
In a Hague case, it seems to be prevalent. I would say in a custody case in New York, I see more fairness in a custody case than I do in a Hague case.
Well, I find that hard to understand the difference, because it's my understanding that in over 95% of all custody cases that are conflictual, the sole custody decisions for mothers, and men are disappeared. I mean, unless this is your own experience and your own practice, you're saying. The statistics seem to be at odds with that.
Well, your statistics and my experience don't necessarily coincide.
From the moment of birth, which is considered actually psychologically a critically important moment, in which men now become kind of engrossed with the newborn infant, the power of seeing the child being born. So that they're being told for the last 30 years to develop much more powerful attachments to their children, not only because it's right, but because women require this in order to be free to pursue other interests in their lives besides child rearing and home creating. The problem is that this is very, very valuable for children and women until the moment of divorce. And then what could make a father a wonderful, happy man, which is his relationship to his children, is now suddenly threatened by the same forces that were requiring and asking him to take a bigger part in child rearing to begin with.
Well, in your book, and I refer back to that because I remember when I read it being struck by this term, parentectomy. What exactly does that mean, and is that something that gets applied to men, or?
Well, it was coined essentially for men, because when the term was coined, that's what we were talking about, and it's actually a term created by Frank Williams.
Oh, really?
Not by me, but I'm allowed to use it. He described parentectomy he used the word parentectomy to describe those families in which, for one reason or another, there was an attempt by usually women to push the father out of the child's life, out of the family life, and usually to substitute a new man into the system, who until recently was often called daddy by the children, even though the real father was maybe a mile or two away. And this had, I believe, devastating effect on families and on children.
It isn't coincidental that allegations of sexual abuse are hurled against men in these child abduction cases.
During the time I was in court, she had people help her who would, for example, film me coming to pick him up. And so all of a sudden one day I come and I'm starting to pick my child up for visitation, and somebody comes around the corner with a camera sticking it in my face. And I said, well, what the hell is this? And they, of course, were silent. And then there was a male and a female there, several people there, in fact. And this went on for a couple of months until the judge ordered it to be stopped. Because I said, this is ridiculous. I mean, they're objectifying me in front of my son. And as we determined later in a trial in family court, what they were doing was they were stripping my boy naked when I brought him back to film to see if he had been abused or not.
How did you feel when you...
Well, I felt quite angry about this. I mean, I felt that this was absurd, that, you know, basically, you know, what they were deliberately doing is creating distance between me and my son. And as we found out in the trial later, they had edited the most glaring examples of me, because obviously I, you know, lost my temper verbally easily when they did this, and they would sort of put it together and would show my son this video, in a sense, to brainwash him.
I didn't know where they were. In court, I found out that Victim Services had them, and that they were in a shelter. This came as a profound shock, because this is a shelter for drug addicts, alcoholics. That's what the New York City shelter system is like. My wife had the better part of $20,000 in savings. I put all bank accounts in her name because she was
So why would she have been in a shelter?
I didn't know.
Answer this, and I hope you're going to be very honest and direct here. Are you saying now on this program that the guardian ad litem for the children knew where your wife and children were, but withheld this information from you until the time you walked into court and you were sandbagged?
Yes, I am. As a result of the Freedom of Information requests from the State Department records, I got a note saying that Hans Steiner had communicated with them on March the 5th. His investigative report to the judge indicated that he had spoken to my wife on March the 5th and had seen her in the shelter.
You know, Al, there are a lot of people out there who are going to be watching this program who are not going to believe this.
It's unbelievable.
What reason?
And it never will be believable.
But what reason do you imagine a court-appointed officer, a guardian ad litem, whose charge duty is the welfare of these innocent children, what reason could he have to lie to you?
It's taken me 4 years of research to figure it out. The New York Society, formed in 1875, is notorious for institutionalizing children of the working class, middle class people. They look for minorities. My wife was Spanish. She fit the bill. The hospitals in New York City give out abused women's handbooks, I found out. If your husband is an alcoholic or an abuser, if he yells at you, cry victim. They teach them how to go in and get a custody order.
So are you
banking and money and power is what's behind it.
So are you saying that, in fact, while you believe your children had been abducted to Argentina, perhaps having an Argentine wife, that for quite some time they had been in the shelter system? The guardian ad litem knew this.
That's right.
And that this information was withheld from you based on what? What would have driven her into the shelter system? Did she go to a hospital? Did she claim domestic violence against you? Did she claim sexual abuse?
My wife and children disappeared on January 16th, 1993. I have never had an opportunity to ever sit with her, or through a third party, to ever find out what went on.
David, now lawyers for children are interposed into this case, and I assume you were taken by surprise by that.
Yes, I was. I knew nothing about that. Nobody tried to notify me, and I only found out through my attorney in New York some weeks after this had taken place.
Right. Now, given that they were appointed by the court, I assume they were court appointed, did they ever make any attempt to see you and the children for the purposes of making a report which may or may not have been put into evidence in this Hague petition?
No, there was no attempt at all to try that.
And they had refused to reveal the whereabouts of your children to you, your attorney, and to the court?
That is correct.
Did they give a reason for that?
Oh, the reasons were spurious, that I was going to attempt to abduct them, and there were some false allegations of possible cruelty or abuse.
Right. So you must have found that very upsetting.
Absolutely. There'd never been any problems in that way between us before.
It's almost virtually a given that in huge numbers of cases throughout the Western world, when there are custody issues involved, there are numbers of sexual abuse allegations hurled against men. And courts, as you pointed out earlier, are very quick to immediately sever the relationship between the child and the male parent once that allegation is raised. Maybe even quite rightly. I understand their concerns.
Because most judges feel that given the allegations, they have to act quickly and conservatively to protect the child.
Exactly.
Which is why it's such a dangerous weapon in the hands of women.
And it is a weapon, is it not? It is
Yes.
being used on the evidence that
There's no doubt about it. It's an unscrupulous weapon.
I know that there was one study done in England in 1993 at Peterborough Hospital in which they found prima facie these allegations were bogus in over 90% of the cases. Immediately throw it away.
I think that within the context of divorce, there are plenty of studies, although I couldn't quote them to you, that suggest that the great majority of allegations of sexual abuse against men that come up within the context of divorce are made falsely. And furthermore, the women who make them are doing such incredible damage.
That was the question I was gonna ask.
Not only to their husbands, ex-husbands, but to their children. That's something, again, there has to be some penalty for it. If you cannot absolutely prove it, then there must be some penalty to stop this from happening.
Well, I know that I've suggested on many occasions that these issues shouldn't be raised in family court, but should be raised in a criminal court. So if you're going to make an allegation like that, let's put it to a jury. Let's put it into a court that has normal rules of evidence, not cases run on allegations alone. Because I'm
going beyond that. I'm saying that
and
if
yes,
it's
there
not
should be
proved,
sanctions.
there has to be sanctions.
I would agree with you.
Because just the allegation causes so much damage to children that there has to be a penalty for making it in an unscrupulous fashion.
Dr. Jacobs has told us of the devastating effects on children of false sexual abuse allegations made by women against fathers. But how do these accusations come into play within the context of a Hague case when fathers try to get children returned? We ask Ray Clore about what defenses are available against the return of abducted children.
Let me ask you a question about this convention, because I mean I've had a chance to read the convention, and also I understand it's not a self-executing treaty, it's a non-self-executing treaty, so we've had to in this country incorporate it into our law. Is that true?
Well, my understanding is that while it could be a self-executing treaty to help make the provisions coincide better with U.S. law, there was an act passed, the International Child Abduction Remedies Act,
yes,
CARA,
exactly, yes.
which was implementing legislation, so it makes it quite understandable, or hopefully quite understandable, for U.S. jurisdictions.
All right, now let me ask this question. If a child or children are abducted to a foreign country, we'll say from here, what defenses would be open to the person charged with the offense? What defenses are there against the application of this convention abroad, or here for that matter?
Okay, the defenses are primarily contained in Article 13 of the convention. One defense is that the left-behind parent was not exercising custody at the time of the abduction, or that they didn't have any custody rights.
Right.
The primary defense that we come up against most of the time is Article 13b, which talks about if a child would be returned to their country of habitual residence, that they would have grave risk of psychological or physical harm.
Some fathers cannot even get the kidnapping issues heard before already prejudiced courts because their children are hidden in an underground railroad system that is well known to state and federal agencies who do nothing about prosecuting its leaders.
Serious allegations that there is some kind of systematic, organized underground to hide abducted children. Did this happen to you?
Well, I believe in this situation, I have evidence now that yes, indeed, it did happen to me.
Another common complaint that's coming to my attention from victim parents of both sexes, but predominantly men, is that children are being hidden in an underground and illegal railroad system or railway system, and the government authorities know all about this underground, but have to this day taken no steps to prosecute its leaders. I mean, do you know anything about this? I know I've spoken with Diane Viggers, she does.
Right. I mean, we believe that there is an underground, that it definitely does exist. I don't know about the efforts to investigate it. Our position has always been that the courts need to be the forum for resolving these matters.
Exactly.
And I know that people become frustrated because they say they can't get a fair deal in the courts, but unless people are willing to use the system, it's never going to be improved if people keep going around it.
Do you think that the people in the Justice Department and the State Department are as aware of the existence of this underground as you are?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Are you saying that they're turning a blind eye?
Basically, they're basically turning a blind eye. I mean, they tried to get them in '92. They tried to get one aspect of the underground in '92 when they attempted to prosecute Faye Yeager. They failed. But we feel there has to be hearings established and new legislation established so that not only is concealment an issue, but organizations that are set up to help children be abducted, they have to be punished too. And that has to be made a federal crime.
Whatever the social dynamics are that are driving this underground, and I suspect that it was begun by a woman who had made allegations of sexual abuse against her husband. The courts did not listen to her, as I understand the matter, and in fact she was subsequently proved to be correct. This man was wanted on several warrants earlier than his relationship with this particular lady. So I understand her reasons for fleeing, but apparently this underground now exists as judge and jury in all cases in which any parent, and it's normally a woman, comes screaming forward saying sexual abuse, domestic violence, I don't want to deal with the courts, hide me. And this can be extremely counterproductive, and it can be totally unjust and wrong.
Right, and that's the concern, is that having one parent unilaterally decide what is in the best interest of the child, it just doesn't work.
So what occurs is you have this sort of amalgamation of the woman's movement of, and in Yeager's case, she seems like she's a fundamentalist Christian, so she argues that the family court system is satanic, that family court judges are satanic, and that fathers will abduct kids and use them for satanic rituals. I mean, stuff that on the face of it is preposterous. However, there's sort of this interlinking. And within several years, you have created throughout the United States a system of safe houses, which basically, if a woman, overwhelmingly females, at least that's what's been reported, and men to some degree, if they feel that they have substantial allegations of child abuse or sexual abuse of the child,
they're
etc.,
taken into this system.
They will be taken into the system. They will be provided new identities. They will be given social security numbers that are phony. In some cases, passports are manufactured, and they will be taken and have their names changed, and will be essentially out of the loop.
All right.
Throughout the whole country, and in some cases their sophistication is such that in response to the attention placed on the underground,
right,
which reached a crescendo in '92 when Yeager was indicted in Georgia, right, for essentially brainwashing. They alleged that she brainwashed some children that were being quote taken into the underground, and she had abducted the children, but that was thrown out in court. They began to then pay attention to taking the kids internationally. They began to say that there are countries that we can take these children to, that we can avoid the FBI, we can avoid the normal procedures. But the main problem is that the way they're set up, they can essentially thwart any of the normal procedures of finding a child, because if you're using false social security numbers, you can't track the children that way. If you can flee from different states, from state to state where you have already weak laws, right, you know, you're not going to have any people prosecuting. And
so you're saying that they're victimizing innocent parents?
Yes,
you're saying that you're an innocent parent.
They're acting in a vigilante fashion.
They're vigilantes.
And basically, I feel they're acting in a fashion where the RICO statute should be applied to them. They're acting in a criminal way to essentially violate the state laws of every state in the country, basically use that weakness and the flaws in the different state laws in the country to basically take kids and put them in situations which we know overwhelmingly shows that the traumatic effects on children is devastating.
I went to Manhattan Family Court, went before a judge. Prior to going before that judge, I had to go to the records clearance room for the records clearance room to give me a clearance to determine that there were no other cases pending.
That there were no other cases pending,
in family court. I got that clearance.
Right.
I went before Judge Kaufman. which is a banking judge, Kaufman Fund in New York. He was very pleasant. He gave me a temporary custody order. I explained
so in
to
other
him,
words, you gave evidence before Judge Kaufman accepted your evidence.
I brought in 3 medical letters, a psychiatrist, an internist, and a psychologist, all that basically were saying she had postpartum psychosis.
And you said that she was missing with the children, and he therefore, based on that evidence...
And I feared that she had gone back to Florida or
Right.
Argentina, and I wanted to go back home to Florida, but I needed this temporary custody order to file a missing persons report.
Okay, so, but this was an ex parte hearing, obviously.
That's
Your
correct.
wife is not present. There's no notice or opportunity to her. I want to stress that, so we're clear about it. All right, but he's given you this order on your evidence.
Which will now allow me to go to the police.
So at this point, you can go to the police.
That's right.
And?
I went to the police that evening, the police station, the 17th precinct on the Upper East Side here in Manhattan. The clerk downstairs, after conferring with the sergeant, after seeing the ex parte order, said, "Did you serve her this order?" And I said, "Look, I've complied with your request. Just fill out the missing persons report for criminal justice services. You have to see the detectives if you want to any information."
And you did see the
I did go up to the detective, and I got beat up. The detective threw me down the stairs.
Why would a
about
detective...
broke my
I mean,
arm.
our view is, you know...
There was no rational explanation for his behavior. He was upset.
Did you
that
have
I
an
was
argument with
questioning him? No, I was very calm.
You have no idea why he attacked you?
I had no idea. I had no idea. He appeared to be upset that I was insisting that they do a missing persons report.
Well, they were refusing. He was
refusing and instructed the staff
And you were
downstairs.
persistent.
And I had complied, and I had gotten a temporary custody order. Apparently, I had done the near impossible.
Right.
I had to go to and call up the commissioner. I think his name Kelly was the commissioner at the time, and complain that, you know, my son is not entered into the computer, and I'm supposed to have that right. That was about a month or two, about 30 to 40 days after the child was taken.
So
I finally got him into
right.
the computer.
I don't know about other states. You might enlighten me. But that in New York State, if you don't possess a custody order, you can't file a missing persons report. If you can't file a missing persons report, you can't get the FBI or located services or anybody to do anything.
The parental...
Is this not madness?
Well, and it does vary from state to state. The parental custodial interference laws, some allow for pre-decree abductions to be considered a crime. But when a child is missing, every police department should take a missing persons report. I mean,
well, I have cases where they just simply hear they've refused to do it.
We will. There is federal law that requires police departments to enter any missing child into the NCIC, which is the National Crime Information Center.
Right.
That is a federal mandate.
The other problem with this is there are no sanctions against doing this. That is...
Well, there's no accountability.
There's not even no accountability, there's no sanction. If you are the kind of parent who sees the world in this way and who then uses pieces of information to try and disrupt the relationship between your co-parent and your children, you may be found to be not doing the right thing. You may lose your case in court. But while you have attempted to do this, there's no punishment for doing it. So the worst you can do is not win.
Right.
So there's not much harm in your mind to try.
Well, this I thought might be one of the predicates behind these acts of abduction, that if we assumed, as the State Department has said, that there's evidence to support the notion that mostly women abduct, I guess the thinking back of that is that there probably will be no sanctions against her for having done that.
I think there are
Isn't that the predicate?
Unfortunately, insufficient sanctions against men and women who abduct their children.
You wake from a nightmare. When I sleepwalk into your room and pick you up and hold you up in the moonlight, you cling to me hard, as if clinging could save us. I think you think I will never die. I think I exude to you the permanence of smoke or stars. Even as my broken arms heal themselves around you. I've heard you tell the sun, don't go down. I've stood by as you told the flower, don't grow old, don't die, little Maud. I would blow the flame out of your silver cup. I would suck the rot from your fingernail. I would brush your sprouting hair of the dying light, and I would scrape the rust off your ivory bones. I would help death escape through the little ribs in your body. I would alchemize the ashes of your cradle back into wood.
Tin can at my feet, think I'll kick it down the street.
Do federal and state judges, because the powers are concurrent, are they? A Hague case can be heard in either federal.
Concurrent original jurisdiction.
Exactly. Do they have the power to issue arrest warrants from within the powers of this convention to ensure that the offending party and the children are brought before the court and that the offender cannot flee the jurisdiction? Are these powers in existence?
As part of the Hague Convention itself?
Or RICRA?
I would think that a judge could use whatever powers he has available to him to, bring people before the court. Not being a lawyer, I'm not sure that if there's some kind of direct relationship between issuing a warrant and the treaty, but definitely to bring people, to subpoena them, to bring them before a court, I would suppose that they would have, this type of power.
Well, I mean, another hypothetical that I'm offering here is based on cases involving victim parents where foreign embassies have literally become involved in these cases, dealing with federal judges where the victim parent cannot get either an arrest warrant or get people to locate the children, and in the end loses sight of the offending parent, who just disappears. This is happening frequently in cases. So what can be done about that? If this is happening, if judges are not taking up their powers of arrest, if they're not locating the children, and if they're not bringing the parties before the court, what is the use of this convention?
Well, certainly we have to educate the judges as to the convention and encourage its use.
All right, let me ask you this. Would it be right for a federal judge, hypothetically, to communicate ex parte with a non-party to an abduction case, and then make an arrangement with that party, if it be an embassy or a consul, for them to obtain a voluntary return of the child, but without the knowledge or consent of the victim parent? Now, I know in the convention, I'm not being tricky here, but there are real concerns.
I think in terms of legal powers and technicalia, this is probably beyond my scope.
David Burton lost his Hague case on a technicality, and having run out of money, turned to me. I brought the matter into a federal forum based on violations of his civil rights, and the case eventually came before Judge Lawrence McKenna.
You called me and advised me that Mother's ex-attorney had called you and understood that we'd won the case and she had left and been returned to England.
But as far as you were concerned and I was concerned, we hadn't won the case, there'd been no decision.
This was the first knowledge we had that anything had moved or changed.
So in other words, it was around this time that you discovered that your wife was no longer in the United States with your children, but was somewhere back in England.
That's right. I made one other phone call to somebody who I thought might have some idea and got a semi-confirmation that they also thought that the children and mother had left to come back to England.
All right. Now, you must have been in some ways cheered, but in other ways very concerned.
I was concerned, and I didn't know exactly when they had returned.
Right. Did you find out at any subsequent point what had transpired to suddenly affect the return of your wife and children to the United Kingdom, where she obviously did not want to leave? She'd been here a year and a half.
My understanding is that the British consulate had been contacted by some welfare agency or had been in touch with, and also the judge, and they the British consulate had asked the judge whether they could assist returning the children and mother to England, and that in fact took place.
Let's be very clear about this. Are you suggesting that the judge, ex parte, without your knowledge or consent, entered into discussions with a foreign government, the British consulate in New York, for a means to get a quote-unquote voluntary return of your wife without any judicial process involving you?
That is correct. We had been waiting for a decision, and unbeknownst to me, they returned, and as I found out later, confirmed in a letter, the British consulate and the judge had been liaising over the matter.
We went to the British consulate to ask for their comment on our allegations that they had interfered with the Hague Treaty and with the United States judicial process by conspiring ex parte with a federal judge to deprive David Burton of a proper decision in his case, thus allowing the mother to return to Britain unfettered by a kidnapping conviction. This would have far-reaching consequences on his case for custody in the United Kingdom. They declined to comment.
If you had your children both here with you now, what would you tell them about what's happened and how you feel?
I would have to tell them that I love them very dearly, and all the time we've been apart, I have been trying desperately to be with them and just enjoy life with them.
Do you think they think that they've been deserted?
I'm sure they think I've deserted. That I have deserted them because of all the movement and the infrequent contact that's been permitted.
What's that going to do to them?
It's going to take a long time for them to adjust back, and there could be some permanent emotional harm. I don't know, only time will tell.
In cases like the ones we're talking about, where there is a kind of an intense regression going on, emotional regression during a time of divorce, where there has to be a good guy and a bad guy within the mind of a parent, where blame has to be completely externalized. These parents will induct their children into the same belief system.
Right.
And the induction takes place mostly of the child by the parent who they spend the most time with. So that if, for example, most of the time is spent with the mother, and the mother feels that the father is all bad and must be punished and is doing terrible things, she begins to sell this notion almost in a brainwashing way to the child. Now, obviously, if the child is very small, this is a fairly easy thing to do. And as children get older, the notion is that it's still a relatively easy thing to do for the following reasons. One is that most children need their parents desperately, and they do feel very, very attached to the parent who is the primary nurturer and is spending more time with them.
Even if that's the abducting parent.
Even if it's the abducting parent, or even if the child hasn't been abducted. I think you can have parental alienation syndrome without an abduction.
Right.
All right. Just because the child spends a lot of time with the parent, and furthermore, in order for the child to live comfortably with that parent, the child must accept the parent's view of reality. If the child were to say, "Hey, Mom, I don't agree with you. I think you're making this up. I think that you're going too far. I think that you're not looking at yourself."
They're threatened with the loss of love from that parent, aren't they?
Then they're threatened with an emotional catastrophe, which is either the withdrawal of love of the parent who they're accusing of being unfair, or the absolute breakdown and collapse of that parent in the face of the child's reality, which is that I need this vision of reality to function. And so the child then is essentially brainwashed into believing the same thing. And it's not, by the way, a brainwashing that's superficial. It's not like, oh, I'll just pretend I believe this. The child actually does believe it. It changes the child's vision of life. And part of what is happening is that the child then has to deny an aspect of the child's own self, which is the other parent, in order to live comfortably with the parent that it's living with.
So in your view, having said that, if this were used as a legal mechanism for the non-return of an abducted child in international abduction cases, it would have
medium and long-term consequences on the life of the child.
It becomes absolutely obvious that for this to be a criteria for the return of a child after abduction is absurd at its face value. Right. Because after most abductions, there will be a parental alienation syndrome. There will be a certain amount of brainwashing, and the child will not be used to being with the other parent. And it will take a significant amount of time, energy, love, and patience on the part of both the courts and the other parent to help the child reorganize its vision of reality, which is going to be very frightening to the child. Because as the child does reorganize its vision of reality, it's going to have to change its vision of the abducting parent.
And yet, perhaps this is the reason you cry, this the nightmare you wake from, being forever in the pre-trembling of a house that falls. In a restaurant once, everyone quietly eating. You clambered up onto my lap to all the mouthfuls rising towards all the mouths. At the top of your voice, you cried your one word. Kaka, kaka, kaka. And each spoonful stopped a moment in midair in its withering steam. Yes, you cling, because I, like you, only sooner than you will go down the path of vanished alphabets. The road leads mist to the other side of the darkness. Your arms, like the shoes left behind, like the adjectives in the halting speech of very old men, which used to be able to call up the forgotten nouns.
If you, imaginary situation, if you had Jordan, is it Jordan?
Jordan, yes.
If Jordan was sitting here next to you right now,
right,
what would you tell him?
Well, I tell him I love him very much, and and his daddy has done everything he could to fight to find you, and his daddy doesn't want this to happen to any other child. See, that's the other thing about this that has to be stressed. That while, yes, I have a selfish motivation, I want my boy back, I don't want this to happen to anybody. I don't want this to happen to any future children yet unborn, to have this terrible trauma, because again, the impact on children is devastating.
I'd like to conclude this message to my children.
Right.
And I am left with now not wanting to bring my children back into this system. Even if I were to get a fair trial, I would not let the government and the awesome power of the government interfere with my family, including my ex-wife. And this is my last hope of ever getting a message to my children, and I'll get a copy of this tape and send it to them in Argentina. And I'd like to say, Dominique and Nicole, papi, te quiero mucho.
We'll walk out among the black stones of the field in the rain, and the stones saying over their one word, Sigit, 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 and the raindrops hitting you on the fontanelle over and over, and you standing there unable to let them in. But if one day it happens, you find yourself with someone you love in a cafe at one end of the Pont Mirabeau, at the zinc bar where white wine stands in upward opening glasses. And if you commit then, as we did, the era of thinking, one day all of this will only be memory. Learn to reach deeper into the sorrows to come, to touch the almost imaginary bones under the face, to hear under the laughter the wind crying across the stones, kiss the mouth which tells you, here is the world. This mouth, this laughter, these temple bones, the still undanced cadence of vanishing. In the light the moon sends back, I can see in your eyes the hand that waved once in my father's eyes, a tiny kite wobbling far up in the twilight of his last look, and the angel of all mortal things lets go. the string.
Help the needy and show them
Back you go,
the way.
into your crib.
Human
The last blackbird lights up his gold wings. Farewell. Your eyes close inside your head in sleep already. In your dreams, the hours begin to sing. Little sleep's head sprouting hair in the moonlight. When I come back, we will go out together. We will walk out together among the 10,000 things, each scratched in time with such knowledge. The wages of dying.
Now, sweet little old brown-eyed girl, hey now that you're sleeping, I've got a confession to make about secrets that I've been keeping. Me and your mama had some problems, a whole lot of things on our minds. But lately, girl, we've been thinking that we were wasting time nearly all the time. And your daddy loves you. Your daddy loves his girl. Your daddy loves you. See, your daddy loves his girl. Hey, now. Now, sweet little old chocolate girl, now that you're sleeping, I feel braver. I've got a confession to make. Let me sneak it in while you're dreaming. Me and your mama had some troubles. There've been a whole lot of things on our mind.